The sky over New York City burned red as the first wave of alien warships descended through the atmosphere. They came without warning, without diplomacy, only destruction. Within hours, Earth's major cities crumbled under the sheer might of an enemy unlike anything humanity had ever faced. The invaders called themselves the Vakar, a ruthless interstellar empire that had conquered hundreds of worlds. To them, Earth was nothing more than another nameless rock to be subjugated. They miscalculated. Jake Carter stood in the wreckage of his old neighborhood, gripping an assault rifle he had scavenged from a fallen soldier. He had been a mechanic before all this, just another guy trying to pay rent and avoid the endless grind. Now, like everyone else who had survived the first days of the invasion, he was a soldier, whether he wanted to be or not. The Vakar had underestimated humanity, assuming Earth would surrender as so many before them had. But they didn't understand what it meant to fight humans. They didn't understand the rage that built inside those who had lost everything. Jake crouched behind an overturned car as a squad of Vakar foot soldiers marched through the ruins of what had once been a grocery store. They were tall, skeletal creatures, their exoskeletal armor gleaming in the firelight. Their black eyes scanned for movement, their plasma rifles humming with deadly energy. A whisper crackled in his stolen radio. "Carter, we've got a chance to take them. You in?" Jake recognized the voice. Reyna Vasquez, a former Marine who had taken charge of their ragtag resistance group. She had lost her entire family in the first wave, and now she fought like a woman with nothing left to lose. "Damn right, I'm in," Jake murmured, tightening his grip on the rifle. A quick, sharp whistle cut through the air, a signal. Jake rolled out from cover and opened fire. The first shot took one of the Vakar straight in the head, sending it sprawling backward. The others barely had time to react before the resistance fighters rained bullets and explosives upon them. It wasn't clean. The Vakar had superior technology, but humans had something else: ingenuity, unpredictability, and sheer, unrelenting fury. The battle was over in seconds, and as the smoke cleared, Reyna jogged up beside Jake, her face streaked with dirt and blood. "We're taking the fight to them," she said, eyes burning with determination. "No more hiding, no more running. They want our planet. Let's make them regret ever setting foot here." Jake exhaled, glancing up at the warships looming overhead. He knew Reyna was right. Humanity wasn't just going to survive this war. They were going to make the Vakar wish they had never heard of Earth. "Let's do it," he said. The resistance was growing. Across the globe, pockets of humanity were pushing back against the invaders with whatever they had: stolen alien weapons, homemade explosives, even sharpened steel. The Vakar had expected an easy conquest. Instead, they found themselves locked in a war they had never anticipated. Jake and Reyna led their small unit through the skeletal remains of New York City, dodging patrols and scavenging supplies. The old world was gone, its towering buildings now crumbling monuments to a civilization that refused to die quietly. The Vakar controlled the skies, but the streets belonged to the resistance. They reached an abandoned subway station, one of the many hideouts where survivors regrouped and planned their next moves. As they descended into the underground tunnels, dozens of faces turned toward them, worn, exhausted, but not broken. There were engineers, medics, and former soldiers, all of them working together to keep the resistance alive. At the center of it all was an older man bent over a table cluttered with maps, electronic devices, and stolen Vakar tech, General Elias Monroe. Once a respected leader in the U.S. military, now the de facto commander of what remained of Earth's fighting force. Monroe looked up as Reyna and Jake approached. "I assume you didn't come back empty-handed." Jake tossed a plasma rifle onto the table. More toys for the cause. Monroe grunted in approval. Good. We'll need every advantage we can get. He turned to a screen displaying a grainy, static-filled feed. It showed a massive Vakar warship hovering over what had once been Washington, D.C. We've intercepted transmissions. The Vakar High Command is stationed on that ship. If we take it out, we send a message to the entire fleet. Reyna folded her arms. You're talking about attacking a command ship. With what exactly? Monroe smirked. We've been working on that. He gestured toward the corner of the room, where a group of scientists huddled around what looked like a stripped-down Vakar drone. We've managed to reprogram one of their own machines. If we can get it inside that warship, we can detonate their power core from within. Jake exhaled sharply. That's one hell of a plan. Desperate times, Carter, Monroe said, but we need people to get that drone into position. Reyna cracked her knuckles. Then we better get moving. The mission was madness, a suicide run. But Jake didn't hesitate. The Vakar had taken everything from them. Now it was time to take something back. The night was thick with smoke and the scent of burned metal as Jake and Reyna moved through the ruins, their team close behind. The plan was simple. Get the hacked Vakar drone close enough to the command ship's security grid, let it slip inside, and watch as the whole thing turned into a funeral pyre. Simple didn't mean easy. The city was crawling with patrols. Vakar foot soldiers moved in tight formations, their insect-like heads swiveling as they scanned the streets. Drones hummed above, searching for heat signatures. The resistance had learned how to avoid them, keeping to the shadows, moving when the enemy wasn't looking. Jake's heart pounded as they crouched behind an overturned bus. A squad of Vakar marched past, their glowing blue visors casting eerie light against the rubble. One wrong move, one stray noise, and it was over. Reyna gave a silent signal. Wait. Jake gritted his teeth, keeping his breathing steady. He could feel the weight of the stolen Vakar rifle in his hands. Human weapons were becoming useless. Bullets barely scratched their armor anymore. Plasma was the only thing that worked, and even that took precision. The aliens moved on, their strange, clicking language fading into the distance. Go, Reyna whispered. They moved fast, weaving between broken buildings and abandoned vehicles, the hacked drone floating behind them. It was no bigger than a basketball, its surface pulsing with stolen Vakar technology. Monroe's team had spent weeks cracking its code, turning it against its creators. If it worked, the war would change in an instant. If it failed, they would all be dead before sunrise. They reached the outskirts of the drop zone. The command ship loomed above them, a massive obsidian fortress suspended in the sky. Beams of light scanned the ground, searching for threats. Jake clenched his jaw. The resistance had managed to get this close before, but no one had ever come back. Reyna tapped her earpiece. Monroe, we're in position. Static. Then his voice. Copy that. Sending the signal. The drone shuddered. Its lights flickered, then stabilized. A soft hum filled the air as it activated its cloaking field. Jake watched as it became a shimmer in the darkness, nearly invisible. Go, baby, Reyna whispered. The drone shot forward, slipping through the security grid. They held their breath as it disappeared into the ship's underbelly. Jake wiped sweat from his brow. Now what? Monroe's voice came through the comm. Now we pray to whatever gods we have left. Minutes crawled by. Then the alarms started. The warship's lights flickered, its thrusters sputtering. The Vakar below stopped in confusion, their weapons raised. Something was wrong. And then, a deep, rumbling explosion ripped through the air. The sky lit up as fire burst from the command ship's core. The ground trembled beneath them as the mighty vessel lurched, its structure collapsing inward. The Vakar on the ground screamed in their strange alien tongues as their leader's flagship came crashing down. The resistance had just killed a god. Jake felt a surge of triumph as flames engulfed the wreckage. The Vakar fleet had just learned a lesson. Earth was not an easy conquest. They came to conquer, but now they would bleed. Reyna grabbed Jake's arm, her eyes wild with victory. They'll never forget this. Jake nodded, watching the burning sky. Number they won't. The shockwave from the fallen warship roared through the ruins, sending debris flying and knocking Jake onto his back. His ears rang from the explosion, and for a moment all he could hear was muffled chaos. Smoke filled the air, turning the night into a churning battlefield of fire and shadow. Reyna grabbed his arm, pulling him to his feet. "We have to move!" Jake blinked, trying to clear his vision. The command ship was gone, reduced to a smoldering wreck, but the fight wasn't over. If anything, it had just begun. The Vakar were in disarray. Their once organized squads were stumbling through the rubble, their formations broken, their communications scrambled. Some fired blindly, their usual precision lost in the confusion. Others stood frozen, watching their mighty warship burn, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Monroe's voice crackled through their earpieces. "You did it! Holy hell, you actually did it!" Jake grinned through the exhaustion. "Damn right we did. Now get the hell out of there before they regroup," Monroe ordered. Reyna was already moving, her rifle raised as she signaled the others. The resistance fighters emerged from cover, pressing the advantage. Plasma fire streaked through the night as humans cut down the disoriented aliens. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore, they were fighting to win. Jake fired at a Vakar soldier scrambling for cover, hitting it square in the chest. The creature screeched, its exoskeleton splitting apart as it collapsed. More of them fell as the resistance fighters surged forward, relentless in their assault. For the first time since the invasion began, the Vakar were the ones running. But they weren't beaten yet. A distant, inhuman roar echoed through the ruins, deep and guttural. Jake turned toward the sound, his stomach twisting. From the smoke, massive figures emerged, Vakar enforcers. They were bigger than the regular foot soldiers, heavily armored, and wielding weapons that could tear through concrete. Reyna cursed. "Shit! They're bringing in the heavies." Jake's grip on his rifle tightened. "Guess they're pissed." The enforcers raised their weapons, blue energy crackling along their arms. The ground beneath them hissed as their boots melted through the pavement. These weren't just soldiers. They were executioners. "We can't take them head on," Reyna said, eyes darting for an escape route. Jake knew she was right. They had scored a major victory, but this wasn't the final battle. If they stayed, they would be wiped out. Monroe's voice came through again. "Fall back to the tunnels, now!" Reyna grabbed Jake's arm, dragging him toward the nearest alley. The resistance fighters followed, ducking between wreckage as the enforcers opened fire. Energy blasts tore through the ruins, turning solid stone into molten slag. Jake ran, his breath ragged, his muscles screaming. Behind them, the enforcers moved with terrifying precision, relentless and cold. But the resistance knew these streets better. They cut through alleys, jumped over broken walls, and finally reached an old sewer entrance. The metal grate had been blown open long ago, leading into the underground tunnels. "Go, go, go!" Reyna shouted. One by one, the fighters dropped into the darkness. Jake was the last to go, his heart pounding as he slid into the tunnel just as another blast struck the ground above. The explosion shook the earth, sending dust and debris raining down. Silence followed. They had escaped. Barely. Jake caught his breath, leaning against the damp tunnel wall. Around him, the others did the same, their faces streaked with sweat and soot. Raina ran a hand through her hair, her expression unreadable. Monroe's voice came through once more, quieter this time. You all did good. We hit them where it hurts. Jake exhaled. They had taken down a command ship. They had made the Vakar bleed. But the war wasn't over. Not yet. The tunnels stretched into the darkness, damp and claustrophobic. The air was thick with the smell of rust and stagnant water. But down here, they were safe. For now. Jake leaned against the wall, still catching his breath. His body ached from running, from fighting, from surviving. The others around him were in the same state, exhausted but alive. They had struck a blow the Vakar wouldn't soon forget, but it had cost them. We lost Reynolds, one of the fighters, Marco muttered. He didn't make it to the tunnels. Raina clenched her jaw, nodding slowly. She didn't say anything, but the pain in her eyes said enough. Jake swallowed hard. They had lost people before, too many to count, but it never got easier. And it never would. Monroe's voice came through their earpieces again, quieter this time. You did good out there, but listen up. We have a bigger problem. Jake glanced at Raina. Bigger than taking down their command ship? Monroe hesitated. That alone was enough to send a chill through Jake's spine. Then the old soldier said, We've been monitoring their transmissions. After what you pulled tonight, they're bringing in reinforcements. A lot of them. Silence filled the tunnel. Raina was the first to break it. How bad? Monroe sighed. Bad enough that if we don't move fast, there won't be a resistance left to fight. Jake ran a hand over his face. Of course. They had expected retaliation, but this was something else. The Vakar weren't just regrouping. They were preparing to wipe humanity off the map. Marco kicked a piece of rubble. So what do we do? Keep running? Raina straightened. Number we hit them first. Jake raised an eyebrow. You want to go right at them? She nodded. We have no choice. If they're bringing in reinforcements, that means supply lines, landing zones, command centers. We hit them before they can fully mobilize. Monroe hummed over the radio. Raina, that's insane. Maybe, she admitted. But it's our only shot. Jake exhaled slowly. It was reckless, suicidal even. But it was also exactly what the Vakar wouldn't expect. All right, he said. Where do we start? Raina smirked. We take the fight to their main supply base. We cut them off before they even get a chance to strike. Jake grinned despite the exhaustion. He could almost hear Monroe shaking his head. All right, Carter, Monroe muttered. Looks like you just signed up for another suicide mission. Jake chuckled, gripping his rifle. Wouldn't be the first. As the resistance fighters prepared for what was to come, one thing was clear. Earth wasn't just defending itself anymore. It was going on the attack. The resistance fighters moved swiftly through the underground tunnels, their boots splashing through shallow pools of stagnant water. The plan was reckless, borderline suicidal, but that was exactly why it would work. The Vakar were expecting humanity to run, to hide, to scatter in fear. Instead, they were going to strike first. Raina led the way, her plasma rifle slung across her back, her posture tense. Jake walked beside her, occasionally glancing back at the rest of the group. They were all exhausted, running on little more than adrenaline and sheer spite. But no one hesitated. Everyone here had lost too much to stop now. Monroe's voice crackled through the comms. You're about 3 clicks from the target. Intel suggests the Vakar have set up a primary supply depot at the old JFK airport. That's where they're stockpiling weapons, fuel, and reinforcements. We hit it hard, and we slow them down. Jake smirked. Sounds simple enough. It never is, Monroe shot back. Jake couldn't argue with that. They climbed out of the tunnels through an old maintenance hatch, emerging into the night air. The ruins of New York stretched out before them, eerily silent. Fires still burned in the distance where the Vakar warship had crashed, but for now, the immediate area was clear. The airport wasn't far. The massive terminal buildings had been repurposed into Vakar command centers, their sleek, obsidian-colored structures looming against the skyline. The runways, once meant for human aircraft, were now covered in alien transports, unloading fresh troops and weapons. Jake crouched behind a collapsed freeway, surveying the area. The depot was heavily guarded. Vakar soldiers patrolled in pairs, their weapons glowing faintly in the darkness. Automated turrets lined the perimeter, scanning for threats. Reyna muttered a curse. This won't be easy. It never is, Jake echoed Monroe's words. Monroe's voice returned over the radio. You'll need to get close enough to plant the charges. We're low on explosives, so make every shot count. Reyna nodded. All right, we split into 2 teams. Marco, take 5 and flank left. Draw some attention. Carter, you're with me. We're planting the explosives. Marco grinned. Got it. We'll make some noise. As Marco's team moved into position, Jake followed Reyna toward the supply depot. They stayed low, using the rubble as cover, inching closer to the heart of the enemy's operation. Every step brought them closer to either victory or death. Then, the first explosion went off. Marco's team had struck first, hitting a fuel storage tank on the far end of the depot. Fire and smoke erupted into the sky, turning the night into chaos. Alarms blared as Vakar soldiers rushed to contain the flames, their formation breaking. It was the opening they needed. Reyna bolted forward, Jake right behind her. They weaved through the confusion, past distracted guards, slipping deeper into the enemy's stronghold. The supply crates were stacked high, marked with strange Vakar symbols. Reyna pulled out the explosives, setting them along the base of the fuel reserves and munitions crates. Carter, cover me. Jake raised his rifle, scanning the area. A Vakar soldier turned the corner, its black eyes widening in recognition. Before it could react, Jake squeezed the trigger. The plasma bolt struck it in the chest, sending it sprawling to the ground. More were coming. Reyna, hurry! Almost there, she muttered, pressing the detonator into place. Jake fired again, dropping another alien. Marco's team was still fighting on the other side of the depot, drawing most of the attention, but it wouldn't last. More Vakar were swarming in, their weapons flashing in the darkness. Reyna finished the last charge. Done, let's go. They turned to run, but a massive shadow blocked their escape. One of the Vakar enforcers. It loomed over them, its armor thicker than steel, its plasma cannon already charging. Jake's heart pounded. They had seconds, maybe less. Reyna grabbed his arm. Jump! They dove behind a stack of supply crates just as the enforcer fired. The blast vaporized the ground where they had stood moments ago, sending shrapnel flying. Jake coughed, shaking off the daze. We are so screwed. Reyna yanked out her last grenade, her smirk wild and reckless. Not yet. She pulled the pin and lobbed it straight at the enforcer's chest. The explosion sent it staggering, but it wasn't enough to bring it down. Jake gritted his teeth. Screw this! He grabbed a nearby Vakar plasma rifle and charged forward before Reyna could stop him. He fired point-blank at the enforcer's exposed joints, sending bursts of blue energy into the gaps of its armor. Sparks flew, and the creature roared in pain. Then, Reyna's voice rang out. Detonating now! The world exploded in fire. The charges went off in a chain reaction, igniting the fuel reserves, munitions, and everything else in the depot. The shockwave knocked Jake backward, and for a moment all he could hear was ringing. As he struggled to his feet, he saw the enforcer buried beneath the wreckage. The depot was burning. The entire Vakar supply line was in flames. They had done it. Reyna staggered up beside him, grinning through the soot and blood. Told you we'd hit them first. Jake let out a breathless laugh. Yeah, and now they're gonna hit back even harder. Reyna wiped the sweat from her brow. Then we make sure we hit harder. Behind them, the resistance fighters regrouped, watching the destruction unfold. Tonight had been a victory, a brutal, hard-earned victory, but the war wasn't over, and humanity wasn't done fighting. The fire raged behind them, thick black smoke curling into the night sky. The Vakar supply depot, once a critical nerve center for their invasion, was nothing more than a smoldering ruin. But there was no time to celebrate. They had struck first, and now the full weight of the Vakar would come crashing down. Jake wiped a streak of soot from his face, his hands shaking from adrenaline. Around him, the resistance fighters moved quickly, retreating into the ruins before the enemy could reorganize. Marco's team had suffered losses, but they had done their job, buying time for the explosives to do their work. Reyna tapped her earpiece. Monroe, the depot's gone. What's our next move? Static crackled before Monroe's voice came through, tense and urgent. I don't think you understand what you just did, Vasquez. The Vakar aren't just going to send in reinforcements now. They're going to wipe this entire city off the damn map. Jake and Reyna exchanged a look. Then we better get moving, Jake said. Monroe exhaled sharply. Get back to the tunnels, fast. The team took off, weaving through the rubble and twisted steel of what had once been JFK Airport. In the distance, the eerie wails of Vakar distress signals filled the air. The aliens weren't just regrouping, they were calling for something bigger. Jake's stomach twisted. They sprinted through the broken streets, but they weren't alone for long. Vakar drones whirred to life, their sleek metallic bodies slicing through the air like silent hunters. One of them locked onto their position, flashing red as it sent out a pulse. Shit, Marco hissed. They're tracking us. Reyna didn't slow down. We need to lose them. Now. Jake spotted an old office building ahead, its windows shattered, the skeletal remains of its structure still standing. In here, he called, leading the group inside. They ducked into the ruins just as the first plasma bolts rained down, carving glowing scars into the pavement where they had been standing moments before. The drones hovered outside, scanning, waiting. Jake pressed his back against the wall, catching his breath. We can't outrun them forever. Reyna checked her rifle. Then we don't. We set a trap. She knelt down, pulling out the last of their explosives. 2 small charges, not enough to bring the building down, but enough to cause some chaos. Jake nodded. Lure them in, then blow the bastards sky high? Marco grinned. I like it. They moved fast, placing the charges near the entrance before scattering deeper into the building. Reyna fired the first shot, drawing the drone's attention. The machines buzzed in response, darting forward in pursuit. The moment they crossed the threshold, boom! The explosion shattered what remained of the walls, sending steel and concrete raining down. Jake hit the ground as fire and smoke engulfed the entrance. When the dust cleared, the drones were nothing more than scorched metal scraps. But the sound of the explosion had drawn something worse. A deep, inhuman roar echoed through the ruins. Jake's blood ran cold. Tell me that was just my imagination. Reyna swallowed hard. That's something else. They turned toward the street and saw it. A new Vakar war form. It was bigger than anything they had faced before, easily 3 times the size of a human, its exoskeletal armor layered with dark, pulsating veins of energy. Unlike the foot soldiers, this thing moved with eerie precision, as if it was calculating every possible outcome before even taking a step. Marco took a slow step back. "We do not have the firepower for that." Monroe's voice came through their comms, barely a whisper. "That's a Vakar warlord. You're outmatched. Get out of there." The warlord raised its weapon, something unlike anything they had seen before. A long, bladed cannon hummed to life, glowing with an unnatural blue light. The ground beneath it sizzled as it took a step forward. Reyna gritted her teeth. "Run!" The first shot tore through the building, obliterating everything in its path. Jake didn't need to be told twice. He turned and bolted, weaving through the wreckage as the warlord pursued them. The ground shook with each blast. Structures that had withstood years of decay now crumbled as the creature unleashed its fury. Jake risked a glance back, just in time to see Marco trip. "Marco!" Jake skidded to a stop, but the warlord was already moving. Marco looked up, wide-eyed, reaching for his rifle. He didn't stand a chance. The warlord's bladed cannon struck first, impaling him through the chest. "No!" Jake shouted, rage exploding inside him. Marco coughed, blood dripping from his lips, but he was already gone. The warlord tossed his body aside like a broken doll and turned its cold, black eyes toward Jake. Reyna grabbed Jake's arm. "We can't stop! Move!" Jake clenched his fists, his vision blurring with anger, but she was right. They couldn't fight this thing, not yet. He forced himself to turn away, even as Marco's body disappeared in the dust. They ran. The tunnels were close, if they could just make it. Another blast sent them sprawling. Jake hit the ground hard, his ears ringing, his vision spinning. He tried to push himself up, but his limbs felt sluggish. The warlord loomed above them, stepping closer. It raised its weapon. And then the sky erupted. A streak of fire tore through the night, slamming into the warlord with the force of a meteor. The creature roared in pain as the impact sent it staggering. Jake blinked, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Then, more streaks of fire, missiles, explosions ripped through the battlefield, forcing the warlord to retreat. Above them, cutting through the clouds, were sleek, heavily armed aircraft, human aircraft. And then, a voice over the comms, one that Jake hadn't heard in a long time. "This is Captain Adrian Locke of the UEDF, Earth Defense Fleet. Looks like you could use some air support." Jake's breath caught in his throat. They weren't alone. Humanity still had a fighting chance. Jake barely had time to process what was happening. One moment, he and Reyna had been running for their lives, and the next, the sky was raining fire on the Vakar. The warlord let out an ear-splitting screech as another missile slammed into its side, sending it stumbling backward. It wasn't dead, but it was hurt. Jake turned to Reyna, her wide eyes locked on the sleek, angular human aircraft streaking across the sky. He could hardly believe it. The Earth Defense Fleet was still alive. Monroe's voice crackled in their earpieces, his usual gruffness laced with something that almost sounded like relief. "Well, I'll be damned. We're not alone after all." Reyna tapped her earpiece, urgency returning to her voice. "Captain Locke, we thought the fleet was wiped out in the first wave." A slight chuckle came through the radio. "We let them think that. The Vakar hit our orbital stations hard, but they didn't get all of us. We regrouped in deep space, gathered survivors, and now we're back to return the favor." Jake felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Hope. "Where the hell do we sign up?" he asked, still breathless from running. Locke's voice was firm. "Get to the extraction point and we'll talk. We're setting up a command center, but we don't have much time. The Vakar won't let us keep the element of surprise for long." The warlord was recovering, its massive frame rising from the rubble, its armor scorched but intact. It let out a deep, guttural snarl as it raised its weapon again. Locke didn't hesitate. "Keep moving. We'll handle that thing." The aircraft swooped in low, releasing another barrage of missiles. The ground trembled as fire engulfed the battlefield once more. Jake grabbed Reyna's arm, pulling her toward the tunnels. They ran. The ruins blurred around them as they sprinted through the wreckage of the city, dodging fallen debris and smoldering metal. Behind them, the battle raged on. Humanity's counterattack had begun. They reached the tunnel entrance just as another explosion lit up the sky. Jake glanced back one last time. The warlord was still standing, but it was faltering. Maybe, just maybe, humanity had a shot at winning this war. They slid down into the underground, the scent of damp earth and rust filling their lungs. The moment they were inside, Monroe's voice came through again. "All right, listen up. Locke's people are setting up a rendezvous point about 10 miles from here. We need to move fast." Reyna nodded, already taking the lead. "Then let's not waste any time." Jake tightened his grip on his rifle and followed. The war wasn't over. But for the first time since the invasion began, it felt like humanity was no longer just surviving. It was fighting back, and it was winning. The tunnels stretched on, damp and suffocating, but Jake barely noticed. His mind was still racing. The Earth Defense Fleet was alive. Humanity wasn't alone. For the first time since the invasion began, there was a real chance to win this war. Reyna kept a fast pace, her eyes fixed ahead. The weight of what had just happened sat heavy between them. They had lost Marco. They had seen a Vakar warlord in action, and they had watched humanity strike back with a vengeance. No one spoke as they moved deeper into the underground. The only sound was the steady drip of water from the pipes above and the distant echoes of destruction from the surface. They had struck first, but the Vakar weren't done. They never would be. Monroe's voice finally cut through the silence. "All right, we're close. Locke's forces landed just outside the city ruins. We pop up, we link up, and we find out what the hell comes next." Jake exhaled, gripping his rifle. He had spent so long just trying to survive, scavenging, fighting, losing people every day. Now, he was about to stand in front of real soldiers again. Humans who had spent months in deep space, planning, waiting for this moment. The tunnel sloped upward, leading to a rusted-out maintenance hatch. Reyna went first, prying it open and peeking out. The night air hit them, cool against their sweat-soaked skin. "All clear," she whispered. They climbed out one by one, emerging into the skeletal remains of what had once been a highway. The city skyline was broken, distant fires still burning from the earlier battle. But beyond the wreckage, just past the ruins, was something new. Ships. Human ships. Sleek, black Earth Defense Fleet dropships hovered above the ground, their engines humming low. Soldiers in advanced armor moved in coordinated formations, setting up portable command posts, heavy turrets, and communications relays. Jake barely breathed. They had air support. They had soldiers. They had a real goddamn army. And in the middle of it all, standing tall in a battle-worn officer's uniform, was Captain Adrian Locke. She was a legend, or at least she had been before the invasion. Stories about her had spread through the resistance like wildfire. A fleet commander who had refused to retreat when Earth fell, who had led survivors into deep space and sworn to return. And now she had. Locke turned as they approached, her sharp blue eyes scanning them. She was older than Jake had imagined, her face lined with exhaustion and battle scars, but her presence was commanding, undeniable. "You must be Vasquez," she said, nodding at Reyna. "And Carter." Jake gave a hesitant nod. "That's us." Locke glanced at the ragged group behind them. Dirty, wounded, exhausted, but still standing. Hell of a job you pulled off. That depot strike hit them harder than you think. Reyna crossed her arms. Then why do I get the feeling it's not enough? Locke smirked. Because it's not. She turned, motioning them toward a large holo table displaying real-time battlefield data. The Vakar fleet was still massive, still overwhelming. But there were weak spots now, cracks in their defenses. We've been planning this counterattack for months, Locke said. We knew we couldn't take Earth back without a coordinated strike. We've been waiting for the right moment. Jake frowned. And you think this is it? Locke's gaze hardened. You just gave us that moment. She tapped the holo table, zooming in on a massive structure in the heart of the city, one that hadn't been there before the invasion. It pulsed with energy, a towering monolith unlike anything human-made. That, Locke said, is the Vakar control spire. Every major operation they run, communications, planetary defenses, fleet coordination, funnels through it. Jake felt his stomach tighten. So we take that out? We cripple their entire war effort, Locke finished. Silence stretched between them. It was insane. The spire was deep in enemy territory, protected by thousands of Vakar troops, war machines, and, if the reports were right, more warlords. But if they could do it, if they could destroy that spire, humanity might actually have a chance. Reyna let out a slow breath. All right, she said. How do we bring it down? Locke smiled grimly. Glad you asked. The war wasn't over. But humanity had just found its endgame. The briefing room, or what passed for one in the makeshift command center, was a flurry of activity. Soldiers darted between stations, barking orders as holographic displays flickered with incoming data. Jake stood near the holo table, his arms crossed, trying to wrap his head around the sheer scale of what Locke was proposing. The control spire wasn't just a target. It was the Vakar's lifeline on Earth, a nerve center that tied their entire invasion together. Take it out, and their fleet would falter, their ground forces would lose cohesion, and humanity might, just might, claw its way back from the brink. Locke tapped the holo table again, pulling up a detailed scan of the spire. It was a jagged, alien structure, its surface rippling with energy conduits. Surrounding it were layers of defenses, anti-air turrets, patrol drones, and a small army of Vakar troops. At its base, the scans showed something even worse. Warlords, pacing like guard dogs. This isn't a smash and grab, Locke said, her voice steady. We hit this wrong, and we lose everything. Reyna leaned forward, studying the layout. So, what's the plan? Locke gestured to a section of the map. We've got two angles of attack. First, my fleet takes the skies. We draw their air defenses out, thin their numbers, and keep their ships busy. Second, a ground team infiltrates the spire, plants charges at its core, and gets the hell out before it blows. Jake raised an eyebrow. And I'm guessing we're the ground team? Locke met his gaze. You've been fighting in the dirt since this started. You know the terrain, the enemy. My people are trained for space combat. This is your turf. Monroe's voice crackled through the comms, joining the conversation remotely. She's right. We've got the grit for this. Question is, can your fleet hold their own up there? Locke's jaw tightened. We'll hold. We've been retrofitting our ships with Vakar tech we salvaged in deep space. They won't know what hit them. Jake exhaled, running a hand through his hair. It was a hell of a gamble, splitting their forces between a sky battle and a ground assault. But they didn't have the luxury of playing it safe. All right, he said. What's the infill look like? Locke zoomed in on a network of tunnels beneath the spire. The Vakar didn't bother securing the old subway lines. They're too focused on the surface. You go in underground, bypass most of their defenses, and come up inside the spire's perimeter. Reyna smirked. Sneaky, I like it. There's a catch, Locke added. Once you're inside, you'll be on your own. No air support, no backup. If you don't plant those charges and get out fast, you're not getting out at all. The room fell quiet. Jake glanced at Reyna, then at the handful of resistance fighters who had followed them here. They were battered, bruised, and running on fumes, but their eyes burned with the same fire he felt inside. We've made it this far, Jake said. No point stopping now. Locke nodded, a flicker of respect in her expression. Good. You move out at dawn. My fleet will hit them at the same time. Give you the cover you need. She turned to her officers. Get these people geared up. Weapons, explosives, whatever they need. As the soldiers scrambled to obey, Reyna pulled Jake aside. You sure about this? He gave her a tired grin. You're the one who said we hit them harder, right? She snorted. Yeah, well, don't blame me when we're running from warlords again. Wouldn't dream of it. The next few hours were a blur of preparation. The Earth Defense Fleet outfitted them with upgraded gear. Vakar plasma rifles with human modifications, lightweight armor, and enough explosives to level a small city. Jake hefted one of the rifles, feeling its weight. It was strange, holding something so alien yet so familiar. By the time dawn broke, they were ready. The sky above New York was a dull orange, streaked with smoke and the faint hum of Vakar ships. Locke's fleet was already moving into position, their engines roaring as they prepared to engage. Jake stood at the tunnel entrance with Reyna and the others. A dozen fighters, all that remained of their ragtag unit. The weight of the mission pressed down on him, but he shoved it aside. No time for doubt. Monroe's voice came through one last time. Give 'em hell, Carter. Always do, Jake replied. Reyna clapped him on the shoulder. Let's finish this. They descended into the tunnels, the sound of distant explosions echoing above as Locke's fleet engaged the enemy. The war wasn't over yet, but it was about to be, one way or another.